Good evening. I'd like to welcome everybody to our study session tonight. It is April 20th, 2026. We have 3 items on our agenda tonight. We have the Community Partners Grant Program updates, the vacant buildings and properties, and the transfer board, or transferring the Board of Adjustment duties. So we will start, as we always do, with public comment. We have nobody signed up in chambers, and we have nobody signed up online. So we will go ahead and move right to our first agenda item, which is our Community Grant Program updates. Mr. Goff?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to turn it right over to our deputy, Marianne.
Great, thank you. We are here tonight to give an overview of our community partner grant program and discuss some potential updates with you all. I'm joined here tonight with Corey Kohler. He is our housing navigator, and he's going to go ahead and get us kicked off.
All right. Hello, everyone. Good to see you again. As Marianne said, I am Corey Kohler. I'm the housing navigator for the city and also the new staff liaison for the Community Partners Grant Program. So tonight we're going to give a little bit of just a refresh, a history, program overview, and talk about how the program has grown. Then go over some of the changes that have been made most recently, and then finally talk about the changes that we are considering, or you all are considering tonight. And we'll have time for questions at the end. So the Community Partners Grant Program provides funding to nonprofit agencies and programs for activities that benefit the residents of Wheat Ridge. Since its inception 17 years ago, and it was known as the Outside Agency Contribution Program then, it has evolved significantly. One of the most obvious things is the application process. In 2016, Council created a resident volunteer committee to review applications and make all funding decisions, sort of take that out of your hands. And it was also rebranded a few years ago as the Community Partners Grant Program. And we have our very own Patrick Goff to thank for that new name. So I think it's pretty, I hope that's accurate information. Yeah. We've also seen some significant changes recently in the number of applicants and the requests and awards, and we will see that here. Within the past 8 years alone, the number of applicants has almost doubled and the request total has almost tripled. We think there are some causes for this. One is simply this city communications team has done a really good job of promoting the program within the community. We also think that word of mouth plays a big role. Some of the, especially the smaller nonprofits and other agencies that get funded through this program have, told the people in their circles who maybe work for other nonprofits. And also available funding sources just in general are harder and harder to come by. There are fewer funding sources for a lot of these agencies to seek the funding that they need. So that could be another reason that we've seen such an uptick. And it's great that we have more applicants and more engagement with the program, but there was definitely a struggle in keeping up with that demand. And partly because of that struggle, back in January 2025, staff came to you all with some suggestions for changes to the program, many of which you adopted. The first would be to create a 2-tier review process. This would help accommodate program growth and help the committee give proper close consideration to each application. So the 2 tiers became $7,500 and above. So anything below $7,500 did not require a presentation, but everything above $7,500 would require a presentation. This just streamlined evaluation of the smaller requests to give the committee more time to review the larger requests. And really it saved a lot of time and effort, both for the resident volunteers and the applicants themselves. You all also adjusted the timeline for the program to align with the budget schedule so that the committee would be working with as close as possible to a solidified budget number, because there was at least 1 year where after the awards had been named for the agencies, because of a budget shortfall, we had to make a cut to all the awardees and tell them after they had been awarded. They knew it was a possibility, but still, just to avoid that happening in the future, we shifted the timeline to align with the budget process. So now applications open in June, close at the end of August. The committee evaluates in August and September, and then gives their recommendations to you all around budget adoption time. And then the awards are handed out February of the next year. We also made some changes to a situation that we were seeing where there were a handful of agencies that were getting funds for the same services from elsewhere in the city budget, specifically from the general funds, or there was also examples of agencies that were funded through ARPA money. And we made the change that they would not be allowed to sort of double dip and get money for the same services in two different places from the city. It really affected two agencies specifically who really just had to sit out 1 year and now are eligible to apply again this year. We also implemented disclosure statements for applicants who, the example for this is the high school, where there are multiple applicants from one sort of overarching parent organization. And we just asked that they simply let the committee know that they're affiliated with that overarching organization. And then grant reports. Started requiring awardees to submit grant reports. We, of course, wanted to make sure that everyone who receives an award is a good steward of the city's money, but we also wanted to be mindful about not overburdening the agencies. So the reports are, nothing crazy, around 2 pages with a financial breakdown and a narrative summary of what they did with the funds. And, we can then cross-reference and make sure that that matches what they applied for or what they said they were going to use the funds for in their application. And then they go over some performance measures that they agreed to when they signed the contract for the award as well. And it also gives them an opportunity to report any challenges that they encountered. Mary Ann.
All right. So that seems to be working. So we have had good feedback from that. I know that it was a little bit less unwieldy for committee members. Had to review 43 presentations, and now they have fewer to review. So we're really excited about how that turned out last year. However, we do have additional recommendations for how to kind of tighten up the program in general. So I'm going to go through 3 considerations for all of you in individual detail, and then we'll come back at the end to have a discussion and talk about what feels good to you all. So the first is limiting the applications from the same entity. So in the example that Corey gave, we have Wheat Ridge High School specifically that has been applying under several different programs. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. Simplifying the application process. And so given that we're receiving more applications each year, there's an opportunity to potentially tier it further, and then aligning with city council strategic priorities, given that, every now and then we have different things that the council is focusing on specifically, and we may want to focus on that. So as I mentioned, with the multiple applications from the same entity, we are seeing from Wheat Ridge High School that it seems to be potentially word of mouth from the agencies that they're getting success and getting funded through the city, which is great. So we have the STEM program, we have their cheerleading program, their marching band program, the football team are all now applying under, separately. And so what might make sense, and for something that you might want to consider, is for there to be one application from the high school and for it to come from all of the different programs within the high school. And this would work for any other agency as well. And so if hypothetically the committee decided, let's say that they requested $10,000 and the committee said, we want to award you $7,500, you could proportionately award 75% of each program's ask. So that's an option. Another option could be that we say, hey, Wheat Ridge High School, $7,500 is what we're awarding you. Totally up to you on how you'd like to distribute that. So you can decide whether or not we want to be the deciders of how it should be funded individually, or if that's something that city council would say, I trust you to be good stewards with those funds, and then you'll report back in the grant report what that looks like. So that is an option for you all to consider, and that's something that we'd like to discuss later on. The second item is the tiering. So as Corey mentioned, we did 2 tiers. It was anything 7,500 and below didn't require a presentation. Anything above did require a presentation. Council might want to consider decreasing it to anything 5,000 or less not having a presentation, anything 5 to 10 having a presentation, and then anything 10 or above might be something that City Council wants to take a look at and have their eyes on. Another option that council may want to consider is a cap of the total amount you can request. That might be another avenue to consider. I will say, if it's something that City Council does want to take a look at the presentations, based on last year's applicants, that would mean that you would have 18 presentations to review. So something to think about. But that is, it's something that I think simplifying it or limiting the ability for the amount that folks can fund might make sense in order to fully fund more agencies, rather than what we're finding is with 43 applicants, the committee has to decide whether or not they want to basically what we call spread the peanut butter very thinly, or if they want to fully fund more organizations, but that means some organizations don't get funding. So what is that? What's the right avenue there? And it's really hard. It's a tricky balance. So having these tiers might make it a little bit more clean. The other option is a simplified form. And I guess I should say other option. This could happen simultaneously. What we do right now on the application is we have folks are told very clearly what they're being evaluated on. And so right now it is, there's questions on the form like, how will the money be spent? How many Wheat Ridge residents are you serving? How does it benefit the health, welfare, and safety? What percentage of the total request is this to their total budget? That's something that City Council asked a few years ago that we add to the application. Council also asked a couple years ago that we add, what's the impact if you're not funded? And they asked, what are your top 5 funding sources? And then finally, how would you measure your success? So it's not a crazy amount of questions, but it is time consuming for them to figure it out, and not necessarily indicative of their of how well they would do with the funds based on like whether your top 5 funding sources, right? So something to think about. What we've found recently in a lot of the applications that we're applying for, so as an example, Corey just recently applied for funding through the Colorado Gives Foundation, and their application was really simple and it was deliberate from an equity perspective. The questions are mostly yes or no questions. It's things like, what are you planning on doing with the funds? Who are you serving? And how will you know that you did what you said you were going to do? And then at the end, similarly, there's a report at the grant period. So something, again, to consider. And then finally, alignment with the City Council strategic priorities. So what we do right now in the application is we tell them before they give their presentations that you are being evaluated based on the identified community need, the estimated number of Wheat Ridge residents that are served in a year, the program benefits to the quality of life for Wheat Ridge residents, how the program benefits the health, safety, and welfare, and then do you have strong performance measurement? So that seems to be working. It's what the committee members use to evaluate and to score their what they're trying to fund. And then what City Council might want to consider doing is, given that you have strategic priorities, you may find that it is helpful to align any sort of funding focus based on what City Council strategic priorities are. So I threw in a couple examples that Council could consider to, add it, remove some things. But what we have right here is things like housing stability, mental health, youth and senior programming, sustainability and active transportation, and then what we call community convening. So this would be related to places and events. So these are what we have for things for council to consider. So what I'd like to do now is just kind of go through each one and open it up for discussion and direction from City Council. Thank you.
Laura Martell.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. And I have a couple questions, and some of these might be basic because I'm jumping into this as a new council member. With the multiple applications from the same entity, it makes sense for the Wheat Ridge High School situation. I have thoughts about what we might be solving here, but an unintended issue over here with like, the example that came to mind would be the Clear Creek Makerspace. If one of the shops applied for something and didn't know the other shop was, how would we address those kinds of situations? Or would we call out groups to say, hey, we know you have a lot of, like the school, just making sure we're aware of who might not know of those situations. And then the other thing that came to mind was with, what was it, Friends of Stevens on here. How would that impact like other schools? And do we see that happening in other, I guess, other schools? So that was my thought on the multiple applications for the same entity thing. Have you thought about those kinds of things?
Yeah, I think what worked with the disclosure statement, I think could help to at least identify, like, are you part of a larger organization? And I think from there, council can decide, if you're part of a larger organization, staff can kind of pull those together and then say, hey, it looks like multiple of you applied for one thing. This is our rule on how this looks, and then ask them to reapply or figure out what that might look like. We're happy to kind of help them through that process as we figure it out.
So that disclosure statement is a part of the full application?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect, thank you. And then on the simplified application process, is that where like the tiered application thoughts would come in?
Yes.
Okay, I really like the expansion to the 3-tier example that was in our packet and that you discussed. And one thing, I also did the math on there would have been 18 applications for council to review and a 20-minute presentation and them going over and a little bit of buffer, that would be almost 8 hours of review, which is a lot, but really good reason for the time. So 2 things that came to mind for me are, with the criteria that we use or that the committee uses to analyze these applications, is there or could there be a rubric put in place that scoring could be done just on the criteria number system between the committee or council or the appropriate people, and if a certain level if they don't score to a certain level, they automatically get a no funding this year, and then we move on to the next. So that there were 5 applications here that in last year that were over $10,000 that did not get any funding. And if some of those, it was obvious from the beginning, is there a way to say, thank you for your application, but no, without having them go through the whole process before and have to come all the way to council?
It's tough because, yeah, I mean, if they're eligible, we've had some before that applied, and they weren't really eligible. They didn't really meet the intent of the program, and we catch those on the front end.
Yeah.
But there's some that we don't, until we see their presentation, we're not sure.
And that's fair. And that's where, like, if we did a scoring system where there was some objectivity and then also some perspective on the people doing the scoring, that might narrow down who comes forward for a presentation.
We could definitely consider like the committee doing like kind of an initial review
Yeah.
of everyone and seeing what that looks like. I think that we would be open to having that be almost like do you get through to the next process?
Yeah, like round 1, round 2.
Yeah, I think that sounds reasonable.
Or maybe even like a mini presentation to the committee before a large presentation. On the flip side of that, asking to do a big 20-minute presentation is a big lift if chances are low, or if we could make it easier on the applicant.
I do think we want to be mindful of the applicant's time as well.
Yeah. And the other thought I had was that a maximum would be, I think, helpful. Just looking at these numbers, a maximum might help people prepare as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Holteen.
Thank you. So a couple of things, let me get back to my notes here. So just a couple of clarifications. So the request for over $10,000 coming to council was actually to try and maybe separate out if something's getting awarded more than $10,000, it's more in line with our community partners, where the city actually has several community partners where we're funding at these higher levels that are not just singular like programmatic delivery, but rather like this strategic partner, and the city is important enough to us that we're providing them funding like a local works. So I'd like to propose maybe we reconfigure the tiers and look at 2 tiers, and we max it out at awards. Like if you look, we only gave a couple of awards that were between $10,000 and $12,000 in the last couple of years. So perhaps we just cap out the award at 12,000, and we have 2 tiers. We've got a 5,000 and under, like easier tier, and then like a 5 to 12 that is that more rigorous application. And then for programs that are seeking more than I'm saying 12 now, because if we want to just capture everyone who's got, we haven't given more than $12,000 in a while. That they then actually like are pooled with our other, like they're not actually part of this pool of funding. They're like a line item budget presentation, and they are really more of a strategic partner with the city, and we're not giving them like grant funding, but rather figuring out like their strategic alignment as partners outside of this program. So I just want to pause and see if that proposal is clear to people.
Just
And then I
a
have other-
clarifying question on that. So you're talking about maybe like a Jefferson Center for Mental Health who applies to this program, but maybe we would also, or were they discontinued because they were double dipping?
They were only discontinued last year because of the ARPA funding, but that's been fully spent now, so they're eligible again.
Okay, yeah, so maybe something like Jefferson Center.
Yeah, so something like Jefferson Center, where we're like, this is a really important entity in our community, and we, recognize that the funding them at a higher level means that they're more of a line item budget partnership and not competing in this pool. So that's one thing that I'd like to put on the table, because I wasn't intending for us to listen to the over 10,000, in part because like the math gets hard, right? Like what do we decide? And then the committee's got to get back together and meet, and it makes it really confusing. I'd prefer to defer to the committee to make the decisions and pick a cap number. And we trust it up to that cap number, but if a program's going for more than that cap number, then we're looking at them as strategic partners that we're directly funding, not because they're competing with a pool of other grantees. Love the simplified form, just big thumbs up on that. And then the other thing, I think, the strategic priorities, when I think about like when I look back at the last several years, I went back beyond what was in the packet, and the organizations were giving less than $5,000, like typically don't have staff, they don't file, like they're, like scrappy little important community partners that this money like goes a long way. And I think those organizations maybe are not as important to have strategic alignment, but like the bigger grants that come in and do the bigger presentations are generally organizations that are 501c3s. They've got programmatic things they're bringing to us. They've got established histories of what they're doing. There's more accountability. So I would propose that if we move forward with strategic priorities, that we just limit them to the larger tier of grantees. And then I think the last reflection I had, so Weaver High School, I think we got in a pickle with them last year a little bit. So when we realigned to our budget, we got out of alignment with the school year. And so what we're proposing now is a time period where like the grant applications open when the school's not in session. And I think that might have contributed to some of the, what happened last year, where we had sort of like post-award lobbying that resulted in giving additional funds outside of this grant program. So if we're staying on this time frame, then I feel like the best thing for us to do is to just do a block grant to the high school and just take 10% off the top, and it goes to the high school, and then they've got time when they're in session, and their leaders who are part of the different programs are at the table and can talk about prioritizing how those funds go. I worry that if we are doing this in the time frame that we've set forward, we're going to be out of sync with the schools. And it's going to make it hard for them to put together a block proposal to come to us, because if we open it in June and they're out of session, I think that's a little bit problematic. So my proposal would be block grant to the high school and let them divvy it up. And we could require that they bring their sub-grant list to us by the time the budget's approved. But I just want to name we're a little bit out of sync with the school year with this alignment. So those are my comments for now.
Counselor Wood.
Actually, I had a couple of things. The cap was interesting to me as well. In fact, I might ask Mayor Pro Tem Hulteen to go over that a little bit again, because your proposal, it made sense to me. You know, in looking through the previous applicants, or maybe those were the most recent ones, there was one outlier in there, and I wondered, you know, if there was guidance given. And if we didn't have anything in place, there's no way to give guidance. So I like the tiered approach and the cap, because that's a way to do that. And it sets people up to have a more likely opportunity for success. Mayor Pro Tem, on the caps that you recommended, I understood the 12,000 would be a cap because that's the highest we've got in the past. But then you said for those who apply above the cap, we'd have presentations. I got a little lost in that, so
Is it
maybe
okay
I'm
if I
not the
respond
only
to that?
one.
Yeah,
Or maybe
sorry.
I am.
I was like, here's my 9 thoughts. Can you please keep track of them? So to really just sequester the looking at these tiers and the caps is, if you look at our history, like, because we haven't capped the grants, really, we've got people coming in with like fairly ambitious asks that you know, are competing with an increasing number of applicants going in. So I think if we were to communicate these community grants are, you know, there's 2 tiers, you know, you can apply to $1 to $5,000, or, you know, 5 to 10 or 12 or whatever we decide a cap is. We're clearly communicating, like, these are the 2 types of grants we give in these grant amount ranges. And if you are someone who is seeking more money than whatever that cap is, then it's a more strategic conversation with city manager, with our staff, in which we're identifying, much like we do with the Carnation Festival and Local Works and, you know, other like significant grantees that we, you know, give a good amount of money to year over year, because they're really important community partners. And their success is like really part of our community's success. To have them competing in this pool is, and it also helps solve for the double dipping. So like, if you're Jefferson Center and you're a really important community partner, and we think $20,000 a year or whatever, I'm randomly saying numbers, there's no qualified number, but like Jefferson Center is probably worth more than $10,000 a year to us in the community, then that's a strategic conversation with city staff about getting into our budget as a line item and not competing in the pool of $200,000 like community grants that are parsed out for more programmatic things and not overall general operating success. Does that clarify?
It absolutely does, and thank you. That answered my question, and the approach makes sense to me. I also had not thought of a block grant approach for the school. It's an interesting thought to consider. The only other comment that I wanted to make is that the addition of requiring metrics and a report back, essentially, I'm glad that's in place. I think it's a great idea, and I think it proves up the success of the program and where the funding went.
Counselor Quinn.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor, and I agree with my co-counselor and Mayor Pro Tem Hulteen. I had the same thoughts, having 2 tiers and a cap, and the larger folks asking for more. I didn't think of that, but that's perfect. My only question is going to be, like, if we do something like that for the high school and give them a lump sum of money, how do we, and you say you guys divvy it up, but how do we keep, like, there's always somebody way underfunded and somebody way overfunded. We don't want the football team to get the lion's share of it when we need, you know, the band and, you know, those other groups need some. So I just would like to know how we would put, or should we put those kind of controls in when we get to those larger numbers or those bigger block grants to something like that school.
Counselor Okada, did you raise your hand?
Thank you. I think that's a really good point, Councilmember Quinn. In regards to the The first of the three kind of categories that we have up there, the definition of like how we would be grouping entities together and where that efficiency would be gained. I'm skeptical that that would be the real place for us to be able to gain the efficiency. It seems like the critical problem that we're trying to solve is that when we're processing these grants, we're having a lot of people that are coming to the table that are asking us to look at their proposal and kind of process that through. It seems to me that it might be a more efficient place for us to examine the presentation requirements and use that as an area for flexibility to be able to understand whether or not there is as much of a problem with us assessing the different entities within the high school to be able to make good funding decisions without giving that decision to the high school, which may or may not be a favor to the high school. In my mind, it makes from what the conversation has been had so far, an option that I think we should consider is having applicants do a paper application and then leaving it to our committee to be able to do to say these applicants we would like presentations for. This is the set that we would need more information, and then gather that as kind of the deeper tier of it, because it sounded like there was a sometimes we don't know until the presentation occurs, in which case if we don't know, then we can ask for that presentation, and at that point we can kind of have the committee build what that workload looks like for themselves, as opposed to having requirements that are built into the applications. To me, that would mean that if we do a two-tier, I would encourage us to consider that lower tier paper application being less intensive, and then the higher tier paper application being more intensive, with the hope that we can gather the information that we would need and minimize the amount of presentation that would be happening during that period of time. I do have a clarification question. Was in the current application form, was the intended use of the funds already a part of that? It might have been listed, but I might have just missed it.
Yes, it's on there. I'm not sure that I said it verbally, but
Okay, cool.
it's on there, yeah.
And that's it for me.
Councilor
Thank you, Mayor. A lot of good discussions. I agree generally with what everybody said. I'd only like to suggest that I feel like there should be some type of nexus between the amount of money and the amount of effort. But I do think I would like to entertain, even on the smaller ones, just do like a 2 to 3 minute video, that they don't have to come, they don't have to do a formal presentation, but they send like a 2 to 3 minute video presentation. I just think that would help everybody. I think it would help the organization as potentially they grow, that they have an understanding of how these presentations go, and they will get better over the years, and they may ask for more money over the years. And I think it also may help the people trying to get, I know that like when I see something, when I hear something, sometimes it's a little bit two different things. And I think that might be helpful, but just, having a low bar, like a 2 minute video, I could see the high school getting, really excited about like, hey, we get to do a video and someone's going to look at that. And I think it'd be good for them. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Martell.
First, I have a question for Councilmember Ohm. Are you saying a 2 minute video for any applicant or within those block structures?
Well, you're welcome to add on to it. I was just thinking of the ones that were under I think it was the
disclosure.
10,000 or the 5,000.
Oh, okay.
That, where they're like smaller amounts was the idea, but so that everybody would kind of have to do something. But then my understanding was that on the larger fees, they had to do an in-person presentation, which was a lot more work.
Personally, I like the idea of a video. I would not be able to put together a 2 minute video without a lot of work or bringing in favors. And I can, with some of these applicants, I think it's a good idea. I think it might be a barrier for some of them to have the technology and the time and the skills if it's a mom and pop group like Mayor Pro Tem Hulting was talking about. So I like that idea, but I don't know if it's something we could require, but it might be something we can say, if you're interested, you could supplement with one. But what I was wanting to say is I really like the idea that Mayor Pro Tem Hulting brought up with our more significant partners kind of coming out of this population. So I would just want to make sure we have a really clear process, or maybe not a clear process, but a clear way to identify them so that they don't apply here or for some reason don't apply and then miss that conversation to come. So just want to make sure we're thoughtful on scooping them out and keeping that line of communication open. But I really like that separation so that this program is really for those smaller partners that maybe are grassroots or maybe don't have opportunity for those big funding projects. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Snell.
Thank you, Mayor. I like this discussion. A couple of follow-up questions. Marion, I think you probably know, at the end of this last year, were there any suggestions along these lines from any of the committee members? After they had been through that process, was there anything that they thought, hey, maybe next year we should try this?
There were a lot of new things last year that were really helpful. And so one of the things that Cole did for the first time, I think actually 2 years ago, but it worked, was that he does a webinar ahead of time for all of the folks who are going to be applying. And that's where Councilmember Martell, I think, would be able to capture a lot of the folks to let them know there might be a new funding opportunity. So that has been helpful. I think the folks who were on the committee the year prior and had to sit through all those applications or the presentations and then had the reduction, they were very grateful for it. It was still a lot of work because they still reviewed all of the 43 applications pretty closely. So I think that's another reason why the simplified application process was well received. So nothing, no major overhauls from the committee members, but they were grateful to see the changes.
Yeah, I know they put a lot of time into it and took it very seriously, which we were always grateful for. Let's see. I do like the idea of the 2 tiers and perhaps part of that webinar or information at the beginning of the process to some of the known, I guess the known applicants who are bigger, who, may or may not know that several of their divisions are asking for money. It might be worth saying, hey, you, under your umbrella, you have these groups who are also asking for money. And so if we do decide to move ahead, giving them a heads up so that could be part of their presentation or they'll be prepared for that and all the groups involved. And then one final question about the applicants and their report back. Do we always request a report? How is our response with that?
That's a great question. I think of the folks that receive funding, correct me if I'm wrong, Corey, I think that there was only 2 that we were missing. And we have made it clear that if you did not submit your report, you're not eligible to request funding the following year.
Okay, that was going to be my follow-up. Yeah. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Holteen.
I'll go ahead and let Council Larson go next,
Okay.
since I've already spoken.
Yeah, yes, thank you. And I'll be really quick here. The first question I have is there a sort of minimum requirement that they're a nonprofit or registered as?
Yes. Yes.
So the folks raising money to buy uniforms for the band at the high school?
They have to be a nonprofit, non-government, and they can be part of a agency. So for example, and this is how this one gets a little convoluted, is that their funding goes through to the Wheat Ridge Community Foundation. And so by that way, so they're in like several umbrellas.
Yeah.
In that sense, they are a 501c3.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that, yeah, the sort of minimum qualification, they're not just somebody that raised their hand. And then, yeah, I do like the idea of block grant for the high school and the differentiation between community partners and strategic partners. It just makes a lot of sense. Especially when one of the qualifications is what percentage of this grant money is part of your overall. And for some of the larger organizations, we were only talking about a small percentage of what they run through every year. So yeah, I think that's a very good idea. I think, has the idea of a block grant to the high school been raised with the high school folks yet?
No.
Surprise. But no, I agree. I think it's a good idea. So, yeah, I support just about everything we talked about here tonight.
Thank you. Before I go back to Mayor Pro Tem Holteen, Councilor Quinn had a quick question.
Yeah, I guess it's quick. The strategic partner block grant for, I know we're talking for the high school, but after last week's presentation by the Jeffco president, I'm wondering, do we have the wherewithal and the funding to make something like that for all of Jeffco schools? Because I have a feeling it's going to be, that are in Wheat Ridge, Jeffco schools that are in Wheat Ridge, because I have a feeling if they could be hurting for certain, and we might be getting big asks from them, if that makes sense. And I'll quit rambling.
I think I can answer that a little bit. From like an elementary school perspective, they cut a certain percentage of their budget, but it doesn't really affect most of their programming. It's like a para-professional and some other stuff. So they should be fine for now. Wheat Ridge High School is taking bigger cuts because it's a bigger school and, bigger cuts, bigger. So Wheat Ridge and Everett are taking a little bit more. I think from our previous asks, we've had like 2 or 3 from Stevens every year and a bunch from Wheat Ridge High School every year. That's kind of what it looks like usually, so. Okay, back to Mayor Pro Tem Hulteen to maybe give us a consensus.
Well, I'm going to just raise one more thought, but I think we are reaching consensus. I think the thing I just keep wanting to draw attention to is just the schools are disadvantaged during this application period because they are not in session. And one of the things to Counselor Snell's question, we did hear from some of our committee members last year is that like picking and choosing winners within the high school was hard. And so allowing the high school to determine where there's the greatest need for those types of programmatic investment was something that I think the committee members would appreciate too, to not be picking winners and losers at the high school. So I just wanted to share that feedback. So I think, when I look at this, I feel like the question I have is, it's a little bit of splitting hairs, but like the difference between 10 and 12,000, it's not huge probably for us. I would prefer we cap it at 12. Because we do have some of our important partners that may elect to be competitive in this process rather than go for a little bit, probably like higher threshold process to become more of a strategic partner. The second question that comes to mind, and this is maybe more of a Patrick question, Patrick Goff question, the Patrick Quinn question, flush with Patrick. So if we start looking at like the Action Center and Family Tree and others, really more principally as like a community partner that's going through like the city budgeting process, like, do we need to pull some of the funds from the community grant program to be available there? Or do we feel confident that like in our budgeting process, we can accommodate like the 3 or 4 like key community service providers that we generally like to give larger funding to without, like, can we keep the pot whole at 200,000 or do we need to look at shifting some of that money since we've been using some of that money for them?
Yeah, I think it would dilute the community partner grant program too much if we tried to fund these other agencies separately. So I would recommend we try to find the money for both.
Okay.
I just don't know what type of cap we're looking at for the other agencies outside of this, or, some of them could ask for a couple 100,000, right? And as to Pat's thought, it may be a wait and see, and if people hear that the doors are open, we may get more and more requests. I guess I might need some clarification on, do you want staff to recommend as part of the budget, or, because right now we bring the requests from Carnation Festival, the business districts, and Local Works. To you to request, that's a separate line item, right? Approval. Would you want that for all the other applications then as well? 12,000 and above? And didn't we say there was 18
think-
above 12,000? Or above 10,000?
Yeah, so I think the
Yeah.
idea is like these applications would cap at 12, and I think we have enough historic information to probably identify, like when I went back 4 years, and we have 3 or 4 like key community partners that are service providers in our community that we fund at the higher amounts year over year. So
Yeah, I guess just more clarification on what that means to council. Who are those key organizations? Is there a cap on those as well? Or are you saying there's a 12 on those as well? Cap
Well,
or both?
yeah, I guess that's what we're parsing out here. So I wonder, like, could staff bring a recommendation to council to say these are like our, our established community service providers that we've given funding. They've
Yeah.
proven to us over the last several years that they're important partners, and we're recommending funding them at, 15, whatever that recommendation is, as part of the budgeting process. But like, I
Yeah.
think maybe you
Make them
could,
apply those still? Some way, or do it just identify 5, let's say, and let's say we recommend we should give them each 20,000.
yeah, I mean, this is a good discussion.
Yeah.
But, I mean, there's not a huge pool. There's a
Yeah.
pretty specific pool of like 3 or 4 organizations.
Yeah, there's not many.
Yeah, so I'm thinking we don't have to be as expansive
Yeah.
as like everybody, but rather maybe as part of the budget process, looking at historic funding.
Yeah. Yeah, and to keep going a little bit, yeah, it may take a little bit to work through. I mean, some of the historic funding is based on an IGA that we have with that group, right? We have regional IGAs, as an example, with Jefferson Center for detox and crisis management. So we've all agreed as a county to pay for those services. So we'd have to, maybe that's separate. So if it's tied to an IGA or an MOU, those are separate from a separate grant request. So those are things I'm thinking through so that it's not as black and white as it could be, right? So we may have to think through it a little bit. If you want to give us general direction on, is it a staff recommendation? And maybe before the budget process, we come with a list of who we think those service partners are that we would recommend funding to get some answer before the budget or make it part of the budget.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to hear other side, because this is now more squishy and complicated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And could create some confusion to key partners. So anyway, I welcome thoughts from my peers.
How many partners usually is that, do we think?
Well, Jefferson Center for Mental Health, Family Tree, I think is a significant partner for the city.
The Action Center?
The Action Center, yeah, Community Table, trying to think, Senior Resource Center, it was at one point, they haven't asked for money in a while. Yeah, I mean, the list could get, and then, I mean, then the next year,
Stride.
another group may ask, and I think we'd want some kind of discretion or direction on who's going to be in that group and who's not. And I don't necessarily want to make that decision.
Maybe since this is sort of my idea I'm percolating, I wonder if maybe we don't cap at 12 and we don't include strategic partners, because this is feeling really confusing. We historically don't have more than 12, I wasn't making the IGA distinction, and then it gets really messy. And so historically, we really don't give more than 12 often. And so maybe we just cap it at 12, and then that will allow those strategic partners to ask for programmatic, specific, and not general operating requests. And anyway, so I'm rethinking, and now maybe we just do 2 tiers and we cap it at 12, and we don't make it more complicated, because I wasn't thinking about the IGAs.
But are we still looking at a separate list of these strategic partners?
I don't think so, because
Organizations on our list here that are part of an IGA.
On the annual CPGP, Community Partner Grant Program. Yeah, I mean, and that was kind of caused a little bit of confusion this last year, because the direction we got was no double tipping, so we started doing that. But then there was some that were, Jefferson Center as an example, they were getting money through an IGA, but then they were asking for money through this program as well. So what's that, Foothills Regional Housing?
I think Mayor Pro Tem Holtein's idea, she kind of nixed on. I was going to suggest like 5 of those community partners and cap their little ask at like 20 and have like, that would be the third tier instead of two, but if we're nixing the whole idea, never mind.
Counselor Wood.
And actually, I had a question, or not a question, but a comment a little while ago, but I think it arrived back around to where I wanted to go. So it's really good. But I think that the complexities that were brought out, it's good they were brought out and thought through, because my concern was if we identify strategic partners, which we have, then there needs to be a mechanism.
So when you look at without a cap, people are coming in and asking for whatever it is they think they want. And then we've got a committee that's trying to, I think, have the most impact in the community. So a lot of times those larger funding requests don't get funded. And so the cap is to clarify really what the funding opportunity is. So if you look at the consistency, we are generally, most of our grants are between 5,000 to 9,000, the majority of them. So I think just as a courtesy.
Tiering is to also maybe set expectations as well and be able to say, this is the threshold you need to clear in order to be able to qualify for that tier. And then the second tier, this is a higher threshold that you would need to clear in order to be able to get to that tier. That helps me. The only problem that I want to kind of revisit is the amount of labor that we're asking the committee to be able to go through and the presentation requirements that come along with that. That's the only thing that I feel like is still pretty amorphous and up in the air. And I would want to suggest that we think of a way to be able to approach that so we can minimize the amount of presentations. But that's just something I want to put out into the air right there.
So one way we could do that is to increase the threshold for presentations. I
might talk myself out of this out loud. We have a lot of asks in the 7,000 to 12,000 range that are being paid out at the $6,000 range. Could we do a preliminary payout amount and then based on that number, call people in for presentations, or is it only by the ask? If we could really only do it fairly by the ask.
It's really by the
Yeah,
ask,
okay.
because, they
Then-
make those funding decisions after they've heard from everybody. I think what we could say is if you apply in tier one, you are only eligible for the amount between $1 and $5,000. And if you apply in the larger, we are giving grants that are between 5 and 10,000. That might clarify, because I think then it does get messy if someone comes in and asks for 10.
Yeah.
And they've done a whole presentation and then they get $3,000. Whereas someone else who applied for 3,000 only had to do one page and they got
And they
it.
got
So I think we want to be clear, the amount you are eligible for is between 5 and 10 or 1 and 5. These are just in nonprofit granting, we're really consistent. We're not reinventing any wheels here with that.
The other half of that is, I think 5,000 is too low to request a 20-minute presentation. I think that's a lot to ask for that payout to the organization. And I think if it's as low as 5,000, the amount of time that the committee and or council will be spending watching presentations would be significant.
And that was a suggestion, right? Anything below 5, no presentation.
Making clear to our community partners that the grant maximums are 12,000 and they should be thinking, and it might motivate people to do smaller, easier grants as well. So do we have a consensus for that approach on tiering?
Looks like we do.
Okay. And then the simplified application process, including the criteria that Marianne presented to us with more alignment with what some of our other community partners are asking. Do we have a consensus for that?
We do.
Alignment with council's strategic priorities for that second tier, the larger tier. Do we have a consensus for that? All right.
Is that those on that, on the PowerPoint?
Yeah, I didn't hear any discussion on
Okay.
those. And then the multiple applications from the same entity, I'm not 100% sure we're clear on where we're landing with that. We could simplify part of it and just call it a Wheat Ridge High School specific.
Give example, the football team that gets a lot of funding, gets a lot of funding in the small groups that are being scrappy to do their own small groups that are being scrappy to do their own fundraising be overlooked. I like the idea of those groups having to do presentations and we can see who really did the work, but I'm also willing to like let go of that if it means we give the money to the school. I just have concerns around that. Equity.
Just as you're considering this from a timing perspective, we don't disperse the money until February of the following year. So there is time if anyone needs to get that information later.
Counselor Quinn.
I'm not, the block grant, I get it, so we want to give them $12,000, what, just picking a number. But I'm also not opposed to like a presentation to get that 12 so we know where the money's going, if that makes sense. It's kind of a hybrid. I mean, group Wheat Ridge as one, and then they say, oh, the cheerleaders are going to get 3,000 and the football team gets 2,000, and however they dole it out. Is that cool?
Counselor Wood.
I like that. I was trying to think of the way to split the difference, and I think that that's what you just said did it. Because it's like, it's still allowing them to choose where they want the money to go. They make those decisions, but they tell it to us up front rather than after the fact. So I think that's a great solution, Pat.
Counselor Snow.
Yes.
Would that work with the schedule of when we are scheduling presentations versus the school year schedule?
I think if we're saying this is the Wheat Ridge High School specific issue, we can reach out to them directly sooner rather than later to let them get an application in before.
Any other questions on that? Counselor Okada.
Yeah, sorry to belabor a little bit, but the what we're trying to solve here for this one is one perceived group that's kind of slicing it in and kind of giving us a lot of applications that we need to process at a particular time. If that's the problem that we're trying to solve, I don't know if block granting that is going to be the right solution to that. Having been a part of a underfunded high school band, and watching the way that different aspects of how the internal school mechanism may or may not deliver to us the things that we need. And then that means that the football team, I just love that example. That means that the football team gets to not do much effort in order to be able to get things that they want. And then we, as the band, have to work extremely hard and find very creative funding solutions in order to be able to get what we want. Having lived through that, it feels to me like external entities should be the ones that are making the decisions about which apportionment of those pieces go where. Not saying anything specific about Wheat Ridge High School, just about the Stanley Lake High School experience that I had. That makes me really, really hesitant. It also feels like as a council, we may have some fiduciary responsibility to make sure that we're making decisions about how that is getting apportioned. I know that that's not a very strong argument, but that also is an argument that feels important to me, to make sure that if we're going to give money in a direction, that we have some good say about how that money is going to be split up, because it is very different, dollar for dollar, whether it goes to the cheerleaders, the swim team, or the band.
Mayor Pro Tem
Okay,
Martin.
so I think what I'm hearing here, what I'm hearing is that we still want to see what the dollars are going towards. We're up against the, no multiple funding of the same entity. So a proposal to kind of hybridize what's being said here is that we have an off-the-top apportionment that goes to Wheat Ridge High School, that they're told, like, you're getting this much. And then as part of their application process, they then figure out how they're going to divvy, and then their application is coming back to us and saying, here's how we want to spend this money. And then that's what the committee, so it's still a single application, but they're actually bringing forward a proposal for how that is being funded. It still puts the committee in a weird position of having to decide amongst that, like if do they approve it or do they not approve it? But I mean, it's just a really hard nut to crack. And I'm hearing you in that you also have very successful, the POMs are organized and have incredible, POM moms that year, and they're gonna out POM the swim team. Yeah, and so there's always like that, within it. So I'm still not sure we're solving for, we have a high school that we're on average giving actually close to $20,000 a year to, through the different programs. And there's still gonna be ones that are more competitive than others because the pom moms are good one year and the swim team moms, like are all working 2 jobs or whatever. So like the equitable approach to it is kind of unwinnable, but like how do we skirt the not funding multiple?
Sounds like maybe just don't change it, let the committee decide. It didn't seem to be too broken.
All right.
I know there was an issue this last year where somebody didn't get something and they came back, and
Yeah,
I think we
because it
need
was
to
out of
avoid that.
sync with the,
Yeah.
it was out of sync with the, I mean, we just have, the problem is that this is all happening when they're not in school.
Yeah. I
And
mean,
so-
that was the whole intent of creating this committee many years ago, was to have a citizen group making these decisions for us. So we're not doing it.
Yeah.
You're not doing it. The high school's not doing it. And I think if you put some trust in the committee,
I'm fine with that, but are we funding the high school multiple times?
we're funding multiple programs at the high school.
So why is that not funding multiple program at senior center, senior
Yeah.
resource center?
It's true, but I mean, yeah, you could debate that.
Yeah,
There's, can I,
But then, yeah.
yeah.
if I could, there's not one other place other than maybe Lutheran Hospital in Wheat Ridge that has more more people, and more diversity as far as interests and anything else. So, so when I look at the funding for Wheat Ridge High School specifically, we're funding band to football and everything in between STEM, and I would imagine Gone Boarding is going to ask this time, and all those different baseball. It's a very diverse group of people, and we're actually probably funding more of our residents at Wheat Ridge High School than we are in some of these other things that we're directly paying to, would be my argument on that. Councilor Martell.
Is that, how much of a burden is that on our committee, right? Because our committee dissolves.
Yeah.
I guess there's no perfect solution here. If council's comfortable with the Wheat Ridge High School grantees being considered unique entities because they don't have like a single executive director above them that is coordinating a budget, like they are kind of all operating their own unique budgets. If we are comfortable acknowledging that as not a single grantee source, then let's make a no change on Wheat Ridge High School. I just want to make sure we're comfortable. that we're-
I just can't agree with that. I really think that at some point, we have to, discussion obviously with the high school, but I believe that it is the high school's responsibility as the sort of umbrella organization and bringing 10 different presentations or applications to the committee, in addition to all the other things they have to do. It just seems like at some point we have to trust the high school to know what they're doing and to understand the competitive things going on for funding. So I support the original suggestion, and I believe it is something that should be ultimately described by the high school, and they can bring the results to us. And if we have disagreements there, we can certainly point that out. But it is a decision for which group within the high school. It is a decision that ought to be made by the high school.
Counselor Wood.
One more thought I had, and I agree with Counselor Larson. I like the block grant approach. I think it made sense, and I still think it's a good way to go. Back to the report back and the metrics, we'll know, when they report back, they will report back, right, on how they use the funds. It's something that we could consider in upcoming years and maybe make some changes if that's not working when we see how the report back looks.
I will say too, the PTA and SAC and everybody at Wheat Ridge High School, they do have practice divvying up funds because they divvy up the funds from the Farmers 5,000 every year and give it to the different clubs, soccer and all the different. So, if we added $20,000 to their pot and then they can just continually divvy it up the way they divvy it up, that might be a way to go. So it is just that block grant. And I think Councilor Olteen said, I think it's about 20 grand a year that we've been, so if you did 10% off the top of 200,000, right?
Okay, so I think we're back to block grant. Proposal is a 10% off the top block grant that goes to Wheat Ridge High School. One option is that we can ask them to bring back, before we approve the budget, they can bring back the list of what it's going towards. I don't know how much agency we'd have to, mess with it, but we can have a quasi-reporting for them to do before we pass the budget that would ask them to let us know. And I think the timing works for that. So we can do 10% off the top block grant and then request that they submit to us prior to the budget coming to council for first reading, like what the list of grantees are, their sub-grantees. Is that something? Consent?
Do we have
I'm
consensus on
asking
that?
for consensus.
On that.
One quick,
Go ahead, Councilor Quinn.
does that, so now it's just one deal going to Wheat Ridge, and then they divvy it up however they divvy it up? Is that what I'm hearing?
Do we want to ask that the PTSA is the sub-grantor?
I don't think we want to tell them how they do their.
Well, I was gonna say,
Yeah.
you're giving them money and trusting them, then you're gonna,
Yeah.
you're gonna ask them,
Yeah.
like, well, we don't like
Bunch
that.
of strings on it.
And that's what it is. I just want to say, I think where this kind of fell off the tracks was last year, we had several entities come back and ask,
And we gave them money.
and we gave them money anyhow. And so we just virtually just pulled the rug out from underneath the committee. And so I think that was the overlying problem. And so if we don't do this, then we just have to back what the committee says, and the committee's.
Well, like Susan said, if it looks like they're not doing it fairly over the years, then you stop giving them a lump sum.
Yeah.
You're not telling them how to give it to them, but down the road you could.
And part of why they came late was because they were out of session during the summer and didn't feel like they had a fair chance during the application period, which is why we heard from them in the fall and they came back and asked for more money. So I think we also the block grant solves for the offsetting of the application time period, so.
The PTA and the Farmers 5,000 committee.
Where would this block grant money go to? The PTA? Which entity at the school is gonna get it? We could handle that later.
We'll probably have
but-
to figure that out.
Okay.
I don't know, but
Yeah.
it's probably the PT. I don't know.
All right.
We will ask for a report for the allocation, and then I'll be subject to the same report.
Okay, so do we have a consensus for an off-the-top 10% block grant that goes to the Wheat Ridge High School and requires them before we pass the budget to let us know how they're subgranting it? And staff will figure out who that grant actually goes to.
We have all but one, so 78. Is that,
I think that was everything for this item. Thank you, Mayor.
I think we beat that horse. But I think we did. I think that's good. All right, moving on to item number 2, vacant buildings and properties.
Thank you. We'll rearrange here and
Move some furniture.
staff up here. Yeah, we don't have a presentation, just verbal, but. Thanks. Thanks, Corey. Hey, you need food? Are you hungry? It's been a whole hour. There's some meats and there's chips. Come on in.
I'll talk.
Yeah, here we go. Everybody here, stuff? Nobody left? Okay. Chris, Martha. God damn it, put it around your neck. Sorry.
All right, moving on to agenda item number 2, now that we've moved all the furniture and brought the new team in. Mr. Goff, do we have a presentation?
Yeah, we do. I'm just going to quickly introduce it, but then we have staff here this evening that will chime in here in a bit. But tonight we're going to discuss how to better address vacant and abandoned non-residential properties. It's not necessarily a widespread problem in Wheat Ridge, but we do have some properties that have been languishing out there, and they lead to blight, trash, and public safety issues, like trespass, vandalism, the whole broken window syndrome, right? And we've gotten complaints from citizens and others. So our current code does have some enforcement handles, which really handles maintenance of like weeds and junk and different things like that. But really, we don't have a lot of teeth in our code that incentivizes property owners to do something with properties, to move along, to actively manage their buildings. So we put a working group of staff together. We've developed 7-level progressive framework for you to consider this evening. It's not 3 doors, it's 7. But I'm going to turn it over to staff, and I think Sean's going to start. And we'll walk through these different levels and get some feedback.
Yeah. Good evening. I think I've met everybody, but I'm Sean Ray, Division Chief over at the Police Department. Thanks for allowing me to speak tonight. What I'm going to talk about is I'm just the spokesperson right now, but it's been a joint effort between Community Development, Economic Development, Mr. Dahl, CSOs, and City Manager's Office and the Police Department. Like City Manager spoke about with the background, like many jurisdictions in the Denver metro area, Wheat Ridge experiences some vacant non-residential buildings that may be abandoned or underutilized. Like I said, we don't have a widespread vacancy issue, but it is an issue that we'd like to get some direction from you all on. And like was spoken about, the city's existing code addresses some nuisance conditions and property maintenance standards. It doesn't necessarily track a comprehensive list, and it doesn't incentivize a resolution of vacancy as itself in itself. We did an extensive study of peer communities and got some different perspectives in managing these issues. Some programs rely on registration and placarding systems, like in Lakewood, Pueblo, and Alamosa. Others are focused on targeted enforcement tools, such as tracking calls for service and associating fees with those. But several jurisdictions have faced resource complaints and faced roadblocks when they try to implement their procedures. So if you'll indulge me, I'll go through kind of the 7 enforcement options and try to explain those as best as I can to you. The reason there's 7 is there's just a lot of different methods to resolving this issue. It's kind of complex. So level 1 would be to maintain the current approach of what we're doing right now. So the absolute lowest level, we would continue relying on existing code enforcement tools to address nuisance and property maintenance issues. It would continue under any escalated approach described below, where violations are reported or observed. Level 2 would be to identify vacancy. We have several good definitions, and Mr. Dahl has a lot of info too on what it means to define vacancy, and maybe amend the code to a multifaceted vacancy definition, where staff would generate a site report to document evidence of vacancy. It would be an informal internal tracking of vacant properties, meaning owners would not be identified at level 2. So level 1 is kind of where we are. Level 2 is we get a kind of a firm number internally on how many vacant properties we have. Level 3 would be informal outreach. Under this approach, staff would reach out to owners of the identified vacant properties. We would describe the nature of the problem and provide resources and guidance. We would try to get some voluntary compliance, utilizing economic development resources and some CEPTED. We would go out and try to work with owners and try to help them resolve the problem of the vacant building. This approach encourages voluntary compliance. It requires more proactive resources than are currently being deployed and does not recoup costs. It would be implemented as resources allow. Level 4, as we progress down, would be vacancy tracking and escalating fees. It builds on level 3, which is that informal outreach with a structured system, and it would start tracking calls for service associated with the properties. Under this approach, the city would establish a fee schedule, which calls for service to property such as trespass and nuisance would result in fees assessed to the property owner. More frequent calls for service would trigger higher fees. This is similar to the calls for service approach used with the hotel motel program, if you're familiar with that. I'm sure you are. The longer the longer this would go on would incur higher fees, and the intent of the fee is twofold. It's to recoup associated costs with this property that has higher calls for service, and also to incentivize property owners to return to active use. That's the goal. The goal of the program is to really get the building to be an active member here in Wheat Ridge. Although fees with this would have to be calibrated sufficiently high enough to change behavior and motivate an owner to return their property to active use. Vacancy-related fees would discontinue once a property no longer reaches the definition of vacancy, which we would have to define, which would mean active occupancy or mobilized construction. While this approach would recoup costs, it may also exceed current available staff resources. So we would have to have some discussion about some FTEs possibly here if we start with these higher levels. Then levels 5, 6, and 7 escalate further and have been tried in some of our neighboring communities. Level 5 would start where we start collecting, assessing liens and collecting liens for unpaid fees. The city certifies unpaid fees or abatement costs to the county treasurer for collected in the same manner as taxes. Level 6 would be that requiring all of the vacant buildings that we define as vacant to register with the city and pay a vacant registration fee. Oftentimes these are done annually or every 6 months on properties. It can provide some useful information. However, peer communities report that such programs require significant staff resources. And level 7 would be the strongest one, where we would go to a abatement process where we would use our authority when necessary. So that's basically a quick overview of the 7 levels that we've come up with. We're here seeking your input and your advice on which way you would like to implement this trial period. Lauren, I think you have some.
Yeah, no, that was great. What we did try to do is package these back into 3 doors. So
Yes,
as
I know
you
it's a lot
saw
of
on the
information.
last page of your memo, that light touch option is what you heard is level 1, 2, and 3. So we're creating a definition of vacancy. We're doing more tracking than we're doing today, and we're being more proactive as resources allow. That mid-level is assessing fees and the ability to collect them when they're likely not voluntarily paid. High enough to recoup costs and hopefully influence property owner behavior. To the extent you feel like we need a better answer to what is the city doing, this is probably the sweet spot. It's hard to compel people to change their behavior. It is possible to put the squeeze on a little bit when you've got a vacant property for 15 years next to very visible locations in our community. And then at that highest level, sort of most proactive, but also most resource intensive and frankly untested. As you heard, we have not found a community that has solved this. There is no sort of silver bullet in this world. So you saw our recommendation, probably not the highest level, but somewhere to the extent you think this is an issue in either the low to mid-level door. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll go to questions from council. Councilor Okada.
Thank you. And thanks for bringing this issue forward the way that it is. I feel like this is especially well prepared. Mr. Dahl, you might be able to help me with this. The definition of either active occupancy or mobilized construction, it feels like on the surface is nice and clear, but as I start to imagine specific situations, it feels like there might be deeper legal definitions of both those, active occupancy and mobilized construction. Can you help me understand what precedent there might be there?
Sure. The easiest one, of course, is the mobilized construction. This is good. So there'd be a building permit that's active. And, we have had situations where building permits been pulled and then nothing for a year. And so we would want to fine tune that, say building permit, materials on site, active, but that's something I think that we could refine pretty easily, starting with building permit. Because then they've taken an action, they've paid money, they've paid that building permit fee. So that, that by itself is an action. And then you want to follow up on that and make sure that it doesn't fall away. The less clear part of that definition is as you described. And I think that in looking at the definitions that I think we got one from Boulder, we got one from Malamosa, I think. I was reading, getting ready for tonight, thinking that it really is kind of the reasonable person test, isn't it? It's very much like, because it's no one of those things, it's no two of them necessarily in combination, but an arrangement of these things that would leave a reasonable person to make this conclusion. So I'm glad you asked the question, because I was thinking, all right, even when we've decided that they're acting or they're not acting, who makes that decision? And I think it probably has to be an administrative decision that is made, and we actually authorize the community development director, likely, to make that decision based upon the factors shown in the definition. And that decision is memorialized. And maybe there's an option for appeal, and I'd be inclined to say it's memorialized, and if you don't like that decision, it's district court. But that's how I capture the second, that's how I would make more definite the second aspect of that. The first aspect on building permit, if that was the first, that I think we can, that's kind of objective and mechanical. So that's no question, that's a challenge to make sure, because it's that definition that triggers enforcement or forestalls enforcement. So it's key, but I think that's how we would approach it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Councilor Ohm.
Thank you. I got a couple questions. Is there any time frame? I didn't see anything that says like after so many days or after so many years, this is when it escalates to that next level. How do the levels work as far as like, is there a certain amount of time that has to pass, or is it just judgment?
I think that's what we're trying to get some guidance is if we go that way, we will work together and formulate a plan as far as what that looks like and a structure. But the goal is to encourage change here and to make some progress. So I believe that to answer your question, the longer the building is in that problem situation where it's vacant and being a drain on resources, the fees would escalate accordingly.
Yeah, I think what we're trying, it's a good question, and I think we weren't envisioning necessarily that we're going all the way up to level 7 over a certain period of time. We'll design a program that is either low, medium, or high intensity. And then if, if it were to include the fee option, we would design a fee structure that may escalate on its own over time. We haven't come up with those fees yet. We anticipate that based on your direction tonight, if you're choosing low, medium, or high, we're probably back in front of you at a study session before we're figuring out those details. There's no magic number. There's not a great precedent in the code that we looked at, but I think we could all think of a few properties off the top of our head that were like, yeah, that's too long. And so we would design something based on your direction tonight and come back.
I think that, sometimes with these vacant buildings, they definitely just create a drain on the community. They lower the prices for, the surrounding community. I don't know what the motive is of the owner. If the owner motive is just to buy a really bad building, board it up, and sit on it for 20 years and hope that the property appreciates, and then at the expense of the other businesses trying to, build themselves up, then they just cash in. But I am very, very much in favor of, I know Denver has a $5,000 per day for violations. And so they're really getting on top of it. And I'm very much in favor of having something that would escalate that, if it's a commercial building, it's not generating taxes, that we do something that really motivates them, something similar to what we've done with the STRs. I think this is a great topic. I know that if it was a house in our neighborhood, that was abandoned and boarded up, you would just feel that in the community of like this, it's like an anchor just pulling everything down. And people would, want someone to live there and want them to be part of the community. And so I'm very much in favor of how to remediate this, and whatever staff thinks, I'm in full support of having fees to get it turned around, to say like, I want Weavers to be open for business, have a strong community, and that we need to get this fixed. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Martell.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you for the presentation. I agree with Councilmember that I really am motivated to see this addressed. And I think my first question is with the, what did you say, mild or low, medium, high? Or,
Pretty much. Yeah.
Like I would advocate right now for the medium tier, and I equate that to like the level 4 and level 5 as described. And, but I'm wondering do we have to decide between a medium and a high, or can it be, we start with a medium as we work towards starting the process? Because no property would jump right into a high. We'd have to go through the steps. So by starting with a medium and looking at the actual impact to staff, the impact to the need for an FTE or two, like what does the medium approach truly cost us in time so that we can address and prepare for that expense while we're doing this documentation, which I think would need to be very clear. I like the reasonable person criteria, but if we're levying fees that are going to increase on property owners, I think they're going to want, hard definitions to go back to. But I really think that to look into the mid-level now is very necessary. With our community being landlocked, our city being landlocked, these vacant buildings, while they might not be a lot, there are some in just such key locations that if we could get moving on this, we could really have a very big impact to the surrounding community. So I really appreciate that this is coming forward now, and really feel strongly we need to, at a minimum, do a medium and start preparing for the high.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Hulteen.
Thank you. I know as we're talking about this, we all are thinking of a building in my district. So a couple of things sort of come to mind to me that are going to maybe be helpful. I'm definitely full on mid. I think that's like the right way to go. I think to do a small incremental step up from status quo would be insufficient for what we're trying to accomplish. I want to recognize a couple things that might be worth distinguishing. I think recognizing that vacancy is a normal part of a commercial building cycle. And so vacancy itself is not problematic, but problematic vacancy is. And so just as we're moving forward with this, recognizing that we have good, well-intended commercial property owners that are subject to, uncertainty in the commercial real estate market, like there's all sorts of things going on. So I think we want to maybe look at creating some sort of parameters where, like there's like a 6 or 12-month window where it's just subjected to nuisance property things, like they do have to upkeep it and we already have existing. But I think what we're really talking about is like chronically vacant properties that are persistently vacant, where we have landlords that are like opting not to try and like move in the other direction. So I would be open to, having some allowance as like a vacant commercial property comes on our radar, like trying to gauge, like, is it, how long has it been vacant? How much nuisance is going on? And like, can we determine when something kind of goes from having a hard time renting it to like not trying to do it? So, and then the other thing I think about is fully occupied versus partially occupied. And it can be problematic because we can have a building that might have a tenant in one portion of it and not in another portion of it. And, it's a out-of-state landlord or property owner. And they're like, oh, well, we've rented unit A. And meanwhile, units, B, C, D, and E are, broken, boarded up windows and stuff like that. So I think as we bring this back wherever we land, contemplating what like full and partial vacancy definitions, I think will be important. But I've put this on the study session list, I think a couple of years ago, so I'm really glad it's coming forward in part because we're all thinking of one building in particular. And I'm solidly in supportive of the mid approach. And I do feel like the escalating fines have to be pretty serious to show we're serious. And if we're going to do it, if we can't use liens as an option, then, we're not, we're just sending paperwork off to places to some extent. So those are the things I'm thinking about with this, but really excited to see it moving forward.
Thank you. Counselor Snell.
Thank you, Mayor. One question, does economic development right now have any sort of a list, or they reach out periodically to business owners, or have any sort of a way of contacting those business owners that may be out of business or any of that?
Yes, yes, the short answer is yes. I think, where there's a property, you think of like a shopping center where there's maybe property management company, we have a sustained relationship with them. We have built our current economic development manager, as you know, has been here for 15 years, so he's done a really good job of building relationships with the landowners of vacant properties and, checks in with them every so often. There's not a lot we can do to suggest maybe your list price is too high. He'll say that as he's built a relationship, and he's pretty forthright with people. But I think what we've all collectively learned is, there are some, to use your term, chronically or persistently vacant properties who are going to snub their nose at the periodic citations violations that we're good about giving, and sort of entertain a coffee with Steve and be like, okay, and so it's just not effective. So yes, he's on the team. He's not here tonight, but he was very much on the team, and he does, I think, what he can. And it's something that I was just thinking today, we should work into an interview question for the once he retires, and we'll be refilling that position.
say all of this is a step towards fairness. I'm very much in favor of, that new approach with some
Thank you. Counselor Quinn.
Oh, thanks, Mr. Mayor. This is like getting a breakfast burrito, like mild, medium, or hot. I too am in favor of the medium the mid level. And I feel bad for Mayor Pro Tem Hulteen because she's apparently in my head asking the same questions I would, and that's really bad for her. What is, we do this and we go down the road. What if we're like in an economic thing where it's really hard for somebody to sell it, they can't rent it, they couldn't give it away if they had to? I mean, what are we looking at some, if that were to happen? You know, if they can't, be hard for them to afford the fines and the upkeep and like that, you know, like a hardship kind of a thing. What's the thought process on that?
That's a really good question. I think that, and I've made a note, I'll make a written one, I made a mental note. I do think that any process like this has got to have sort of an exception category, but you have to watch out to make sure the exceptions don't swallow the rule and become the standard thing that's then applied for. But I absolutely understand the fact pattern you described. The city would not want to be in the position of kicking someone while they're down, is really what you're describing. And I think it's going to take some drafting, but I think that we can create an appeal exception, deferral of prosecution or deferral of enforcement procedure embedded in this mid-level that would allow the city to take the pressure off for a property owner that was earnestly either, trying to get it done or was trapped by economic circumstances that made sense for us to try to assist rather than make that situation worse. All I'm doing is kind of repeating back to you what I'm hearing, but so that you understand I heard it, and that'll be a little bit of a drafting challenge, but I think it's one that we're up for.
Counselor Wood.
I don't know if I should admit to this or not, but when I read through this, I thought of it as more as a sliding scale rather than or a process rather than individual bullets. Well, because the first bullet under recommendations, I wrote keep. The second one I put start. The third one I put run pilot. And then the last one I put no. But I don't think that that's where we're going. So that, and I understand the issue, and I would wholeheartedly agree with others here that it's something that we want to try to solve because it is a big effect on quality of life for those, particularly who live in the vicinity of vacant properties. But one question I had under recommendations, bullet number 3, it says establish a pilot program escalating fees and lien mechanisms to recoup cost. And I wondered if that was something on the table and if anybody would want to talk a little bit about what that would look like.
Sure. So we would design sort of with more detail what the definition is, what the trigger is, what the paperwork is, who's doing what across our departments, what the fees look like, what the relief might be. And then we use the term pilot program in there, modeled largely after the hotel motel program, which I think actually in the code compelled staff to come back to council within 12 to 18 months because it was such a dramatic shift from our normal operating procedures to sort of do the calculus on calls for service and ratios and whatnot. So because there is no example out there to say, hey, this is going to work great, and we know we can handle this from a bandwidth standpoint, that's what we put pilot program in, recognizing that we can design the heck out of this and hope for the best, and then may not have the consequence that we are desiring. So I hope that answers. We'd come back to you in a study session with more meat on the bone, and then we'd ask to come back to you after a year-ish and let you know if we think that our approach is working or if it's just administrative work.
Counselor Ohm.
Thank you. I just wanted to answer Councilmember Quinn's question. I know in like 2009, along 38th, we probably had 1 in every 5 buildings was gone. But I will say that the buildings generally looked nice from the outside. They weren't boarded up with plywood. They look nice, whereas I have a building in my district that it looks pretty weeded and it's plywood. It's been like that in the best of times for, I don't know, 5+ years. Yeah, long as Patrick's been here. So it's not because of the economy. There's something else going on. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Hulteen.
Thanks. Sorry, we were just having fond memories of this building. I think that one of the things I think about sort of historically is we're talking about vacant buildings, but vacant properties that don't have a building on them. And I was thinking about like the old Ford dealership, which technically had a building on it. But I think as this comes back to us, how are we designing for scale of property too, right? Like, so a fine that is actually tied to the size of the property seems appropriate, because if it's, if it's just like a little cute little, shop on, or a little property on 44th as compared to like, that Ford dealership that just was such a colossal eyesore. I think, how are we scaling for the size of it? And how are we considering like, a vacant property and not just vacant buildings?
Counselor Larson.
Thank you, Mayor. And yeah, I can see this is going to be it's going to be a fairly long process. And I would encourage that we get started on it fairly soon, because there are going to be a lot of questions raised. And what I really liked in the staff memo was the quote there in the background section that said, the reason we're pursuing this would be, quote, neighborhood concerns related to blight, including visible deterioration and the increased likelihood of unlawful activity. And I can't think of a better definition of a nuisance. One of my first question, though, is, are we talking about, we're talking about property, where it would a vacant lot that's unfenced, and there probably wouldn't be any camping there, but it could have the potential for unlawful activity at some point, but it's not a building, it's an empty lot. And then the other thing you'd mentioned about building permits, and I'm wondering, and I'm thinking of an instance in District 4 where we had fit the definition, the very clear definition of a nuisance property. But nothing happened because the developer was going to put in a new building. And for whatever reason, these things tend to get delayed, but it was delayed for a long time. I imagine calls for service were through the roof, because it was just in the right location where, and the conditions in the building were such that people were camped out there for a while. And it was just, again, a nuisance. The other thing is I do recall one of our neighboring cities had an instance where there was a gas station that had been abandoned, and there were people living in it for an extended period, and until there was a fire. And that put an end to that nuisance property. But anyway, I just like to think that if we take the proper steps, we take reasoned, not just jump out and go all the way to abatement, that I think we can put something into effect on the city's books that says, if you have a property, we're not going to let you just let it deteriorate.
Any other questions or comments? Do you have what you need, or do you need a consensus?
We'd like a consensus. I think I've heard mid-level from everybody as an approach, and we'll bring back more details on definitions and fee structures and pilot program and another study session.
Do we have a consensus for the mid-level programs? And we do?
Sure.
Fantastic.
Thank you all.
All right, moving to agenda item number 3, transferring Board of Adjustment duties.
Thank you.
For your presentation.
Thanks, folks.
You
Thanks,
see.
Brian.
This one's me. This topic came up briefly just earlier this month when we did the presentation for the boards and commissions annual report. And when there was a question about it, I decided to follow up quickly while it is fresh in our minds. Actually, Mr. Dahl and our planning manager, Jan, and I had met before that meeting, so it was well-timed. Very timely. Last year, as you heard us mention earlier in April, the Board of Adjustment did not meet a single time. And you saw the table in the memo. In the last 3 years, they've only convened 2 times. You saw the history in the memo too. I want to start by explaining why that frequency is so low. It's really the result of a code amendment from about 20 years ago when after the NRS and our Envision Wheat Ridge comp plan, we were making a lot of code amendments to try to make barriers to investments, particularly investments in residential properties, a lower barrier. So we allowed more variances to be approved administratively. And that meant fewer variances rise to the level of the Board of Adjustment. Just for context, I should have put this in the memo too. We are not doing that many variances at all. We actually only did 1 administrative variance in 2025 and only 3 in 2024. So it's just not a case type that we see very frequently. The threshold that we communicate to folks when it comes to variances is quite simple. Help me understand why the rules that apply to everybody else in Wheat Ridge shouldn't apply to you. Not exactly how the criteria in the code are written, but it is our informal litmus test when people ask for relief. And that dissuades most people from proceeding. The other thing that the Board of Adjustment does is they hear appeals from code interpretation. So we were just talking earlier about like who would make the call on a vacancy. It's not that code specifically. We've had 3 times in my 15 years where the BOA has heard a code interpretation, one related to billboards, one related to the keeping of wild raccoons, and I'm forgetting the third one, but they are few and far between. Yeah, so I think while it is a low volume work, it is still important work. It is quasi judicial work. There is another board that we have, the Planning Commission, that meets more frequently, is accustomed to quasi judicial proceedings, and actually already hears periodic variances when they're tied to another case, like a specific development plan. So what you saw proposed in the memo is that the Planning Commission would absorb those responsibilities. In practice, what I think that means is in the same way that you convene as a city council to have a business meeting and then adjourn and convene for special study session, the members who are the Planning Commission would do the same thing if they ended up with both types of items on the same night. In terms of the volunteer perspective, this is, I'm glad it came up the other day because it's where we feel uncomfortable sometimes onboarding new volunteers to the BOA and training them, and then they sit for 16 months. The other challenge that we've had with the infrequency of their meeting, especially now that we have term limits, is the ability to create experience and leadership and be well practiced in those quasi-judicial proceedings. So what we propose in the memo is a little bit of a longer runway, honor the fact that we have appointed volunteers to the Board of Adjustment, give them the chance to serve the rest of the term through March of 2027. That would also give us the chance to do the small code amendment we'd need to do, a bylaw update we'd need to do, and potentially give our current BOA members the chance to apply to other board and commission appointments when their term would naturally end next March. This is not uncommon in smaller communities. Board of Adjustment, sometimes called the Zoning Board of Appeals. You hear different names. Sometimes that's the Planning Commission, sometimes actually a town or a city council. So it would be more unusual, I think, in our research to see an independent Board of Adjustment for a community of our size. So we tried to strike the balance, honoring those folks who have volunteered, respectful of their appointments, but also a reasonable transition. So we'd love to hear if you're supportive of that approach and if we should move forward in that direction. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Wood.
I'll just say, as explained, I'm supportive of your approach. Makes sense to me.
Thank you. Councilor Ohm.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Holting.
Ditto.
Councilor Snell.
Just one question. Are there any members on the current Board of Adjustment that would be really bummed out to not have this anymore and could we put them, I mean, if they wanted to stay engaged, we'd find another spot for them.
I'm sure there will be some disappointment. I think there's some members on there who ping us before we ping them about whether we have a meeting each month. Our longest standing member, actually somebody we're trying to get a proclamation for, Paul Hovland, has stepped down. He's been on the board for the last 2 decades. I think they have all sensed the sort of lower frequency. I'm most concerned about the people who are like, oh, I got appointed to board, and we don't advertise it as like FYI, they sometimes don't meet at all. We advertise it as it may be a commitment up to once a month. So I think it's just I'm sure there will be some people who are bummed, and I'll leave it to you all to decide sort of, do they get the benefit of an interview for any other board or commission that they might be interested in. But I do think it's a group of folks who is diverse in their interests and skill sets, and I'm sure could be good fits elsewhere too.
Counselor Martell? Did you raise your hand? Sorry. Counselor Larson, I'll let you go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. And just a quick question for Mr. Dahl. Kind of walk through, just as briefly as possible, walk through how the code would change to recognize this.
Sure, fair question, and it'll actually be pretty easy. We have a code section on planning commission that stays there. We have a code section on board of adjustment. Says the board of adjustment does all these things. Here's the standards they apply. Pardon me. Here's their voting requirements. There's sort of a supermajority aspect to getting a variance, which is, important. And we just have to interlineate a couple little lines at the beginning of, say, the planning commission section in the code. It says the planning commission shall function as the board of adjustment, and its members, when appointed, shall also serve as the board of adjustment. And a similar sort of conforming change over in the board of adjustment section. And then we'll do a search through the code to make sure there's no other kind of minor conforming change. But I thought to myself, gosh, this will be more drafting, but it really isn't. It's very few words to accomplish that.
So if the code section describing the planning commission is changed to include the board of adjustment, wouldn't that sort of negate the fact that you're having 2 separate meetings?
Well, no. I mean, the analogy is as described. We'll be publishing, for example, if there's a variance and on a given planning commission agenda, then we'll just, on that agenda, it will say, agenda for planning commission sitting as planning commission sitting as the board of adjustment. And then when you get to that part of the agenda, the chair will say, okay, I'm now going to recess the plan. We'll have to educate the chair. Now I'm going to recess the meeting of the planning commission and convene a meeting of the board of adjustment. And this city council used to do that all the time when it also sat as the liquor authority. That hasn't been true for, 20 years, but there were times when the city council would adjourn or would recess as council, convene as liquor authority, take on a liquor hearing, fully act on that hearing, and then return to the city council meeting. We'll do exactly the same thing for planning commission. Yep.
Mayor Pro Tem Holteen?
Yeah, I have a question about the requirements for the whole of the board. So there's a lot of people, including a lot of alternates, and I'm assuming it's because there's a requisite number of people that are needed for it to actually make a quasi judicial ruling. Is that correct?
The reason, as I understand it, that there's alternates is because the Board of Adjustment can only approve variances by a supermajority. So it is in the applicant's favor to have as good attendance as possible. And with the board that meets so infrequently, we have stacked alternates who we call in to try to get the full 8 as much as possible. Okay. We don't have that issue as often with the Planning Commission. The quorum is actually the same for both bodies, a minimum of 5 to hold the meeting. But the supermajority threshold is in the applicant's favor, the more members who are seated. I don't think we would need to change the planning commission to have alternates. We would just schedule the variances and communicate to the planning commission your attendance is important because there'll be a need for supermajority vote potentially.
Okay, that's
And we
helpful.
already do that, so the code already contemplates that. Pardon me, for the circumstances in which the planning commission is also seeing a variance. So they've already been doing it. But the code actually says when, these are the voting rules, this is the chart. use the voting rules when either the Board of Adjustments meeting or the Planning Commission's meeting on a variance. And it says, members present 8, votes needed to approve 6. Members present 7, votes needed 6. And then it goes down to the minimum quorum, members present 5, votes needed 4. So we just apply that same system. In fact, it wouldn't really require any adjusting.
Part of why I'm asking is that, I mean, we periodically throughout the year between now and next March have openings on boards and commissions. So if this is a direction we go, it sounds like we wouldn't want to be encouraging that. I mean, I was just looking, there's a whole bunch of openings right now, especially with some at large. But I don't think we want to be communicating those opportunities to them because we need them. We need enough members to fulfill those.
I'm winging this year. We could move the code amendment forward sooner than later and maybe create some small exception where you could sit on both boards from point in time through March 27 if it's the BOA and something else, if that sort of bridges the gap. Because I think that's a code.
Yeah, you could do that. You know, you also could adopt the change and make the change effective. You know, you can make an ordinance effective sooner all the way to second reading and later, months later if you wish. So you could publicly show that you're making this change, you've adopted the ordinance, you order that it take effect, you know, in the next year. And that at least allows you to tell people and message to people, this is done. You know, this change has been made, it just won't take effect until next year. Or we could think about some sort of more interim solutions like Lauren suggests.
I would support an exemption to allow them to serve on 2 boards so that they can maximize their opportunities. Because, you know, when we do our big recruitment for our March vacancies, like those are more competitive applications. I know we keep those applications on the books, but I would be open, since we've got people who are excited to serve and we've got opportunities available now and kind of running throughout the year to serve. And since this is a particular board that like there isn't that much of a conflict, I would be encouraging of us to be open to allowing an exemption if we decide to sunset this board, that they can apply and serve on 2 boards until this is sunsetted, so that they're not losing opportunities for service that present themselves.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Any other questions on that? Comments? Okay. Sounds like you've got direction.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Awesome.
Excellent.
So much.
All right, so the end of agenda item number 3, and we will move on to staff reports.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of quick updates. Ridge Fest is going to be here before we know it, June 6th. I was just looking at my calendar this morning. It's back at the Green, June 6th, 2 to 8. Local Works is starting a new 38th Avenue marketing program. Shop Ridge at 38. It's on their website now, but you can get a 20% coupon up to $20 off at each location that you shop along 38th Avenue. So check that out. And our Green, speaking of the Green won People's Choice Award at the recent Downtown Colorado Inc. Celebration over in Grand Junction. And Steve Art won the Downtowner of the Year award. So, yeah, congratulations to both of them. But, yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. We'll go to elected officials reports. Let me have one. Councilor Rom.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple things. I want to give a big thanks to all the parents that helped with the post-prom activities. I tried to help out, but when I got there, the other people had kind of wrapped it up. But I do want to give a special shout out. What's that?
Did you get your thanks?
Yes, I want to give a special shout out to Kent Kilselman, Director of Public Works. One of my constituents had asked for the safety cones because they wanted to make a tricycle race in the high school. And so he was able to have his staff come and bring those over. That was great. I did not get a chance to try out the tricycles. Looked like fun. And there was something else I was gonna mention, but anyway, the other thing that I did want to say is about the we've had 2 boards that have closed, 2 doors, and one idea that I thought about, and I don't need to go super deep in it, but I just keep thinking like, you know, is there a need to have a board for like public health, mental health? That we have some really talented people that are in this community, and they would be a great fit. Something to think about. If you want to talk to me about it later or talk to Patrick, I don't know, Patrick, if you think it's a bad idea, let me know. But I just see a lot of it. I feel like mental health is something, you know, and sometimes I see other things on public health meetings that is just not my wheelhouse. But there's some really talented people here in the city that would, you know, I think about like, I met this guy this summer, and that's why I brought it up in my district at an event. And we were chatting, and I was like, wow, this person really wants to be involved in the community. But, you know, I mentioned a couple other boards to him, and it just wasn't checking the box for him. And so I thought like, well, man, maybe this might be something. So just an idea. Thank you.
Counselor Quinn.
Super quick, I'm the liaison apparently to Parks and Rec. And they had, I was able to attend their meeting last Thursday, I believe it was. And they swore in a couple new members, elected new vice chair and chairman. They talked a little bit about the drought restrictions and some collaboration with the IDEA committee and a few others as well, to come up with a plan to collaborate on some projects. They discussed their calendar of events coming up. Earth Day is right around the corner, 4 days from now. So they're doing they have an Earth Day extravaganza from 8:30 to noon. They are one item away on their CAPRA, the accreditation for Parks and Rec agencies, and that happens, like, I think Karen said, like every 4 years or 5 years. This will be their 2nd or 3rd time of getting it, so it's a really big deal. And she really wanted to get the 45 out of the 45. I think you have to get 40 out of the 45 things, and she wanted to get the whole thing. And there's one little thing that's kind of under review. There was somebody couldn't show up, or there was a weird thing that happened, so they're re-reviewing that. So hopefully she can get 45 out of 45. They went over all their concerts and things that are happening at the Green and then at other places. I'm sure it's going to be on their website, Rooted in Fun, and talked about a few of the other projects, Tabor Lake and some other things, Clear Creek trail design. They're going to fix the sidewalk on the Clear Creek Trail, and I'm looking at the map in my head and I can see it, but I can't describe where it's at. Right around Wadsworth, and it's going to be kind of a pain, but they have a detour set up, and some public art updates, and it was a really good meeting and a very active board, and I'm excited to see them move forward and continue on. One thing I do want a little solemn remembrance today, 27 years ago, was the Columbine. So we keep all those folks in our thoughts and prayers tonight. Thanks.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Holteen.
Thank you. So District 2 is hosting a meeting this Saturday, and we're really excited to have Parks and Rec there to talk about some of the exciting things that are currently happening in District 2 and could be happening in the future. So we hope people will come. And then Scott and I went through our list of updates, and we've got a lot going on. And so we encourage people to join us at 3 o'clock at the Grange on Saturday. And definitely lots to talk about. So hope to see you there. We'll have some nibbles and something to keep you from getting too thirsty, and we'll leave time for people to make sure they are having an opportunity to ask questions and raise issues, concerns, questions, or big ideas. We always want to hear that. And then I, like many of my peers, joined the CAPRA certification breakfast that the city hosted. And it was really exciting. And I got to speak with one of the evaluators. And one of the things she said that just really stood out to her is that there's just such a culture of collaboration and welcomeness. Like and I was like, well, can you give examples? She's like, just everything is an example of it. She goes, she's like, I've just never experienced anything that has been so welcoming and so collaborative. And she kind of went on to say that sometimes you do site visits and like different departments are kind of sequestered or like, competing for resources. And I think one of the other things I got out of my conversation with her that I think has been in front of me, but I didn't make the connection until talking to her, is she was just impressed with like how good we're doing at our core competencies as a Parks and Recreation department and meeting our community needs. And it dawned on me, because we do so well, doing the things that need to be done to make our community happy, we're able to take some risks and try new things. And this evaluator was really talking about the importance of that so that Parks and Recreation departments and don't get like stuck at a certain point of success. And I just recognize like we try new things in this city and some of them work great and some of them not as well. But by doing that, we're, evolving with our community. And so I left the breakfast both very like not hungry and also really like specifically proud of the work that we do, that I think we see, 365 days a year. But one morning it was really nice to like really get a clear picture of it. So good work to Karen and her crew.
Thank you. Councilor Martell.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to kind of continue what Mayor Pro Tem Hulteen was saying. I also was able to attend that breakfast and spend some time talking to the same evaluator. And while I was standing talking to her, like 3 different city employees walked by and I'm like, excuse me, and I hug, and excuse me, and I hug. And a couple other council members came up and I'm like, excuse me. And I'm like, we're huggers. And she was like, everybody knows and likes each other. She made that observation to me, which I thought was like, we do. We work hard and we like each other. So that was my takeaway from the breakfast and a full tummy. I also wanted to say, similar to Councilmember Quinn, I was recently appointed the liaison for Sustainable Wheat Ridge and was able to attend my first meeting this last week. And wow, that is an amazing group. I've been involved with the Panorama Park Sustainable Neighborhood, kind of under that program, for a while. But this was my first meeting with Sustainable Wheat Ridge, that committee, and I'm very excited to get to work with them. They have new leadership, new chair, new vice chair, and they're really looking forward to doing some big things. So I'm excited for that opportunity to work with them. Sneaking back to the Panorama Park Sustainable Neighborhood, which is actually all of District 1, they had an event this last weekend where they gave away native plants and had an event at Panorama Park talking about native plants and watering, and had over 40 people, which was a really good turnout for them. And they have another event coming up in May that will take place at the Clear Creek Makerspace, and they will have all the equipment necessary for people to come in for a free workshop and learn how to make a bee hotel so that you can attract and have pollinators in your yard. So mark your calendars for May 9th, and I'm sure I'll talk about it more before then. But it's exciting to see all the work that the neighborhood groups are doing and that Sustainable Wheat Ridge is doing. Thanks.
Sounds like we need a raccoon hotel. Councilor Wood.
Unfortunately, I won't be here next Monday, and I will miss being here with you guys. But I'm attending the American Planning Association National Conference in Detroit, where this will be great for me professionally. I'll learn a lot, but hopefully I'll also go to some sessions that'll benefit the work that we do here. I'm not sure how much we have in common with a Rust Belt city that's shrinking and seeking to rebuild, but I'm sure there'll be some good takeaways. But I will miss being with you guys.
Thank you. Councilor Snell.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of things. in addition to the breakfast for Parks and Rec, which I had a great time. I'm so proud of our Parks and Rec department. I also got to attend the Jefferson Center for Mental Health spring soiree last Thursday evening, and had a great time. Some of my colleagues also present, and it's always nice to get dressed up and have nice food. But the main takeaway that I got from that night was not only what an important organization the Jefferson Center for Mental Health is, but how lucky we are to have it in our community. And that was reinforced several times throughout that program in the evening, of just realizing everyone's struggles, realizing the way that Jefferson Center meets them where they're at, and some really, really interesting and really inspiring things that people are doing around therapy with art. We got to see a lot of art and hear from an artist on a video who was in programs with Jefferson Center. So time well spent, and I always say this, but we're very lucky to have them in our community, and I know that a lot of our residents benefit from their services. So it was a good evening. And then tomorrow morning is our office hours for District 1 at Ann's Pie Cafe. So come talk to your neighbors, have some pie, win-win. Come talk to us. Always welcome. Come and go as you please. It is from 9 to 11, and they are located next door to Wheat Ridge Meats on 29th Avenue. So hope to see everyone there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Larson.
If I don't write this stuff down, I will forget it. But I want to talk about last week, and it was a busy week for me. This past Tuesday, I traveled to the West Slope for the 12th Annual Energy and Environment Symposium. As I headed up the Eisenhower Tunnel, there were a few white-knuckle moments driving through a late morning snow squall. When I checked into the hotel in Rifle, I saw that I had just missed the 75-car pileup by a half an hour. The Energy and Environment Conference is hosted by Colorado Mesa University and Garfield County. The day-and-a-half agenda included presentations by the top Colorado state economist, a panel of experts on new approaches to nuclear energy, and the new deputy director of the federal BLM, a guy with roots here in Colorado. Panel discussions included advancements in geothermal energy, new water management techniques for data centers, and the switch to electrification in the oil and natural gas patch. We heard Colorado updates from, among others, Dan Gibbs, the top guy at the State Department of Natural Resources, as well as the executive director at the Department of Local Affairs, and leaders from Parks and Wildlife, Department of Natural Resources, and the Public Health and Environment Department. Local perspectives were provided by reps from Weld County, the towns of Erie, Frederick, and Meade. Both days featured keynotes from industry authorities. Their messages sometimes challenged accepted norms, but ultimately they expressed confidence in our energy future. I was grateful for the opportunity to attend the E&E Symposium because it provides local government leaders in Colorado with insights into energy regulation, emergent energy technologies, and how we will develop and use energy in the future. Finally, I was amused by how many times I was asked, how many oil and gas wells are in Wheat Ridge? There are none, I replied, as far as I know. But we do have a brand new city park on 38th Avenue that the state's energy industry helped to pay for. It's a handsome city park in a town that's changed for the better since the last time you were there. You should stop by and have a look next time you're in town. On Saturday, I put in a volunteer shift at the semi-annual paper shred-a-thon and electronics recycling event at the fairgrounds, hosted by the Jefferson County Library Foundation. Saturday morning was a bit chilly and the lines were long, but it was well worth the time. The shred-a-thon event helps people safely dispose of household documents and recycle their old electronics while raising a few bucks for the Library Foundation. Afterwards, I was tired, but I can tell you that I slept well that night. And finally, earlier today, I attended the kickoff event recognizing National Crime Victims' Rights Week at Porchlight, a family justice center in Lakewood. Speakers included Colorado Attorney General Phil Weiser, district attorneys from Denver and Jefferson County. But the most affecting remarks were delivered by two crime survivors. one who recounted her day as a student at Columbine High School on April 20th, 1999. The other survived a vicious attack by her ex-husband and now helps others as a victim's advocate. Although much remains to be done to advance the rights of victims, we have come a long way in recognizing and standing up for crime victims in Colorado. I can't wait to see what's on the calendar for this week. I have to write this down.
Thank you. Sounds like a busy week. I was honored to join several of you at Social Capital last week for the Jefferson Center gala, especially on April 20th. I think it's a big day to talk about mental health, and I think I was a junior in high school when that happened, and that was a tipping point for our country, and it's not gotten better since. So hopefully we can work on our mental health and get better with that. I was very heartened yesterday to drive down 38th Avenue on my way to Stuyvesant Crate to pick up some waffles for the kids, to see a very large line outside of Mr. Biscuits, and then I got Stuyvesant Crate, large line outside Get Right. So it's great to see that so many people are in our community and see so much value here. So we will go ahead and wrap up our meeting tonight. We'll be back next Monday, April 27th, for a regular business meeting. It looks like a pretty full agenda, I believe, so.
Not too bad.
Not too bad. All right. Well, we look forward to seeing everybody again next week. Please make sure you're safe in our community. We have a lot of kids going to school for their last month or so of school, so get out, and if you can find it,